sometimes people tend to think of privacy as something secondary. And the conversation in some spaces has been limited to why do you want your privacy? What do you have to hide? Okay, and that framing has been problematic. So today's webinar aims to allow us to understand the relationship between technological convenience and personal privacy. When you click on terms and conditions and you agree to using a website and they generate most of your data, how do you balance the choice of convenience in accessing resources vis-a-vis making informed choices with your personal data? Today's session will take about 55 minutes, and I'm going to introduce the panelists, after which I will ask them 2 questions, which they'll all respond to, following which we shall have a Q&A session. I'm very pleased that today we have 3 outstanding gentlemen who have been making meaningful contribution in different spaces that concern privacy. First is Mr. Kenneth Kwesiga. Mr. Kenneth Kwesiga, who is the co-founder and CEO of IoTech Limited, a financial technology company licensed and regulated by the Central Bank of Uganda to build secure financial technology solutions that bring services closer to individuals and businesses through intuitive digital channels. Kenneth has had an illustrious career of management, strategic execution, and executive leadership with frontier, emerging, and developed markets. In his previous roles, he has been exposed to leading and coordinating global teams, working on technology-led projects in several diverse sectors, such as investment banking, insurance, microcredit, and financial technology. Kenneth is also a board member of the Financial Technology Service Providers Association, a role he has fundamentally served by contributing to the formation and shaping of policy to the financial technology sector through active stakeholder engagements, as well as cultivating industry-wide partnerships and investor relationships. Kenneth is a results-oriented person with a high level of professionalism and a knack for financial technology. He's now on a venture building mission of building IoTech Limited into the next unicorn built in Uganda and by Ugandans. Kenneth, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much, Joel. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm happy to be here.
Excited to have you here. Next speaker will be Mr. Daudi Asimwe, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Technology Disputes Resolution in Uganda. He is interested in the intersection of law and emerging technologies. Mr. Asimwe, you are most welcome.
Thank you, Joel, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We're very pleased to have you, and we're keen to hear from your experience working with a youth think tank that is leading the conversation on privacy. And our third speaker for the day, or third panelist for the day, is Mr. Chimera Tony. Mr. Chimera Tony. Mr. Chimera Tony is a team leader at Consent Uganda, a consumer advocacy, quality culture, and better business organization. With an education background in administration and 28 years experience as a consumer advocate, serving on organizational committees at national, regional, and international levels in areas of food, trade, environment, communication, finance, and utilities, promoting consumer protection agendas in policy, legal, regulatory, and institutional frameworks. He's currently serving on a number of national standards technical committees, as he is the chairperson of the Consumer Committee of African Standards Organization. He's a convener of the ISO Working Group 21 on Communication and Outreach, and he is the CI representative on the ACP-AU Economic and Social Issues Committee, and is the chairperson of the Food Safety Coalition in Uganda. He served as the CEO of the Uganda Consumers Protection Association, CI rep on the Committee on World Food Security, and is a member of the Bank of Uganda Governor's Final Consumer Protection Consultative Group and Financial Literacy Advisory Group. Mr. Chimera Henry Richard, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much, Joel, and it is an honor being with you all, colleagues, and I look forward to the discourse.
Excellent. And I think we have to hit the ball rolling. Mr. Chimera, it's such a great pleasure to have you here. And I think today's topic is really, really important, especially because we really have to balance convenience vis-a-vis privacy. So many times people consent and they agree to their data being collected without knowing the implications of that data collection. But also in several spaces, people question, is the consent framework even the best way in which consumers should allow their data to be used? And I think we're going to get into a little bit of that. But to start us off, and I think I will start the question, maybe Kenneth will go first. In this digital era, we frequently have to balance convenience and privacy. Can you share from your daily life a scenario where you face this choice, especially between using digital services and preserving your privacy? How do you typically approach that decision? I guess we'll hear every panelist's view, but I think we can start with Kenneth to share his own personal experience. Yeah.
Thanks, Joel. And I'm really, really happy to be here to be sharing on a topic that is dear to us, most especially in the technology world. It's a very good icebreaker, and many times I really wonder how we're going to manage to balance that. But my experience has been with the use of ride-hailing services. I'll take an example, Uber. Yeah, you use it and you're going to the office, and then you put in another trip, you're going home. And then the more you use that type of application, it's definitely going to ask you or encourage you to name certain frequent places that you go to. So you'll find yourself, identifying your home on the app so that the next time you're going home, you don't have to type the entire address. You just, click home. And then you'll also find yourself identifying the office that you go to. So that next time you want to go to the office, you just type for office. So it makes it very convenient. It makes it quite easy. But on the flip side, now the owner of the app knows where your home is and knows where your office is and knows where your other places that you usually go to, where they are. So you find yourself in a situation where you're wondering, okay, how much more does this app know about me? But also, do they have, very good data privacy policies in place? Will they share my data? And situations like that. I think there's a time I interchanged them out of being paranoid, and I didn't want Uber to know where my home is or where my my office is. So I interchanged them as an effort to put a measure in place so that what was home, I called it office. What was office, I called it home. But it came back to bite me, of course. One day I wanted to actually go home, and I found myself at the office. So those are some of the challenges that we face. But also there were other life experience. It might not be digital, but many times you walk into buildings and you find this book where you have to sign. They ask you to access this building. You have to write your name, you write your telephone number, you write the number plate of the car that you've driven in. So you find that you've left quite a lot of personal identifiable information in that book, but you don't even know how that book is going to be handled. Is it going to be handled well? Is it going to be used to wrap chapati the next time I am buying a Rolex on the roadside? So those are the kind of life experiences I've had, some digital, some not. But yeah, back to you, Joel. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kenneth. And I think you've raised very critical points. Sometimes we don't think about the information we're giving out. I think I could relate especially to both the two scenarios you've shared. But I think the one for me is on my phone, sometimes just keeping on your location being accessed. And sometimes you receive recommendations from different people. But also I've wondered on some occasions how people have gotten my phone number, and I receive messages from organizations that I'm not even sure I gave them my phone number. I understand that sometimes people access this information that is given in books at the entry of buildings, and then they use that as a mass messaging service. And so I think you raise very critical points, Kenneth, and thank you for pointing that out. Maybe we could move over to Mr. Asimwe. Could you share with us from your own, personal experience, when do you face this choice between using digital services and preserving your own privacy?
All right, thank you, Joel. I would say I would share experiences with Kenneth, especially with the ride-hailing services. I find it interesting that they are able to keep track and know all these things. And if the holder of that information were to be a sinister person, what would they use that information for? When they know your name, if you're a person of interest, or if you're working in a delicate industry, and maybe there are people after you, will they contact these organizations, to get some of these personal details? So that's an area that I think is very important. In my personal experience, it's with the mobile banking and mobile money usage. I think we're in an era of information, and right now I think we transact a lot, and for me it's about how do I keep my transactions safe. I've had interactions with people who have lost lots of money, and I never wanted to be my turn to tell a story of how I lost a huge sum of money. So for me, it's how do I keep my login information safe? If I sign into a device that's not mine, I make sure to log out so that the user of that device or whoever will use it will not access my credentials. So mobile banking is now a very common thing, and we've had people who have lost their telephones, say through theft, or they have misplaced them, and the person who stole it is able to, withdraw money from your bank using the mobile banking app, or even the mobile money app. So are you able to log out of these apps? Are you able to maybe use two-factor authentication? Because these mobile apps do have those options. Are you able to say, if I log in with my email, is your email logged out if the device is stolen? Because someone can steal your device and still be able to log in into your mobile apps because your email was not logged out. When you're changing password, they use you can use an email as a two-factor authentication. So if a fraudster or a thief is able to access your email, then you've lost some money. And when you go to the banks to complain or to the courts, usually they'll point to negligence. And for me, it's about vigilance. So I need to be a vigilant user. These apps and tools have come to help us to be conveniently able to send and receive money at low costs. But how do you make sure that you're using it safely? So for me, that's an area that I think is very important. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, no. I think, Mr. Asima, you've really hit the nail in, because most certainly everyone wants the convenient choice. I used to at some point always save the details of my login to my mobile banking, to my several platforms that I was using on the internet, and that actually, at least from your conversation and later on, I learned when I got passionate about privacy, exposed me in some way. Because if someone accesses my device, then they have logins to all the online platforms, and some of them are financial, so the risk is quite elevated. So thank you, Mr. Asime, for sharing that insight. And I think the key word I got from you was vigilant, being vigilant, as opposed to not just doing something out of convenience. Yes, and then I think lastly to Mr. Chimera, I would like you to weigh in from your own professional or personal experience. Can you tell us, about when you faced the scenario of a choice between using digital services and preserving your own privacy?
Thank you very much, Joel, and I would like to thank all my colleagues. What they have just shared is something that we encounter on a daily basis as individual consumers. So it is cross-cutting, and their experience, I trust, even to those that are listening in, they're experiencing them in a different way in one way or another. Like personally, some of these aspects, my data footprint at times makes me really wonder, should I remain analog or should I go digital? Because of the experiences that we are all experiencing at times when we go out. I've ever been duped. And even when I think that I'm knowledgeable, I'll give you a very interesting scenario. I had just finished moderating a consumer parliament with Uganda Communications Commission. And we had just talked about these very aspects. And right a few minutes, right after talking about protecting our passwords, our data, the Mufele calls me. I'm calling from UCC and we want to update you. And I just said, but I've just been moderating all about this. Just imagine, I am knowledgeable and I've been moderating a session telling consumers to protect themselves. And here is somebody at the very minute targeting the very person who has been advising consumers. So you find that these aspects are quite challenging and they require us to be very vigilant and to be very key and use all these applications, the infrastructure diligently. I'll give you another example, which also brings me down to that. The Google Maps every week gives me an update. I have not asked for the update, but it tells me you have been here, you have been there, and you have been, and it isn't able. And I ask myself, who authorizes these gadgets to start sharing? I've not asked for the information. So these are some of the challenges that lead us. Even some places I don't remember going to, but I get a summary of my movements around in a week given by Google Maps. So these are some of the challenging things. The other aspects that make me still think and really wonder, and I trust all of us and those listening in have experienced it. You go to a mobile money and one mentions your name loud and clear, and everybody around gets to know you are so and so. I ask, some of these things are supposed to be discreet, but then it ends up being public knowledge. So these are some of the things that we find are quite challenging for us as consumers, those that are in the know and those that are not in the know. So Joel, with that background, I'm looking at the theme of the day and the month. It is very key that as we have the right to access, these are enablers of life, but it is very key to make sure that on our part as consumers, we protect our data and privacy aspects. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Chimera. I think you raise very, very critical points. I think sometimes you feel like you have to choose between, do you stay analog? But now it's almost like you're excluded if you're not tapping into these digital platforms, which, as ably discussed by Mr. Chimera, are finding creative ways of collecting your information. But I also felt one of the key segues in what Mr. Chimera mentioned was, who is authorizing these people to collect this data? And what I find, shocking is that usually people have signed away. They've ticked a box or they've signed some long document, fine print. And for me, that really always takes me to the point of, can you meaningfully consent to the collection of data without knowing how it is going to be used further down the line? Because while I practice law and I represent different people in data issues and privacy, I also teach at the university, and one of the conversations we have in privacy is consent the best framework in which to protect consumers? Because when you consent to okay, I'll give you my data, you can monitor. How do you know how do you consent to the possibility of a third party receiving this information if you're not aware of the third party? How can you possibly how can it be meaningful consent if you're not aware of the downstream users? And so I feel when Mr. Chimera mentioned that, it really invokes us to think about consent. Is consent effective? And so just to want to remind those who are tuning in, thank you for joining. We have wonderful panelists who are leaders in this industry and space. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button on the platform so that we can address your questions. I'll just ask each of the panelists one more question, and then we're going to dive into your questions. I like the way the conversation has been mapped, and I think if you'll permit me, I'll move to Mr. Asimwe, and then after maybe we'll ask Kenneth, because now I need to ask them specific questions from their own experiences that they can share, especially as we think about balancing convenience and privacy. So Mr. Asimwe, in your experience, what are the key factors that typically lead to disputes in technology and privacy? And how can they be mitigated, especially because you lead an organization that's leading the conversation on technology disputes? So what are those key factors that always lead to disputes in tech and privacy, and how can they be mitigated? I recently read a decision from the High Court of Uganda where, you know, an employer had taken photos of the employees and they used them in promotional materials, and they were sued in the High Court, and the High Court said, no, that was breaching the privacy rights of the employee. And so I know there are a number of cases, although not in this jurisdiction, but from your experience, can you just share with us some of the key factors that lead to disputes in tech and privacy, and how can they be mitigated?
All right, thank you, Joel. That's a very interesting question, because we're in a developing economy, and we are definitely going to interface so many issues with privacy. With development comes issues with intellectual property, like the example you've given. Can your employer use your intellectual property to their benefit? And I think one of the areas that would mitigate that is clear data protection laws. So we've had the Personal Data Protection Office being very active in the last few years, and we need that in this economy. So before that, there was no clear pathway to protection of personal data. And we need laws like that in place in order to protect consumers. So lack of proper, clear laws in this line will always lead to conflict, especially between consumers and those who take advantage of them, like the example you gave. And we have the courts in place now that ideally should be protecting the consumers. So we need the courts to be in tandem with the needs of the consumer. So, so my first point is lack of proper, clear laws always leads to conflict. Well, the other is definitely the gap between, there's a technology gap between those who understand how technology works and those who don't, who are yet they are consumers. So I would say we need more outreaches, especially into rural areas. We have incidences in mobile money. I don't know if you've ever read your terms and conditions, but they're quite long. But mobile money terms and conditions are sometimes unfair to the consumer, even to the agents, the mobile money agents. So we have that knowledge gap between the users and the people who give these services. And you find that people are taken advantage of in these areas. People don't know that you can reverse money that has been sent to a wrong person via mobile money, yet that service is there. So are we able to translate these issues into our local mother tongue so that people are able to know that they are able to access such help? Yeah. So there is a knowledge gap in that area. And I think PDPO is doing well in helping to bridge that gap with webinars like this, especially in our economy. So there's also issues with social media and privacy. I think we have a generation that is very in touch with themselves and they're able to express themselves clearly on social media. But you find that some people's accounts are breached and their pictures are used to catfish, for example. So how are these individuals able to protect their personal information? I've seen this very common with ladies who post their pictures on Instagram and someone is able to collect those pictures and create another account on a different platform and pose as that person. So that's stolen identity. So are you able to know how to keep your personal details on lockdown? These platforms have privacy settings that we can use. So WhatsApp has privacy settings whereby if someone is not in your contact list, they are not able to see your profile picture, for example. So people who are able to use these measures are more protected from identity theft. So I think those are the main areas really, but we need, I think, to bridge the knowledge gap between the consumers and the technology that we use. We need outreach programs that can help to educate individuals on how to use their data safely. So in the work that we do, we've dealt with mitigating mobile money complaints. For example, we had a project like that for a year, and we saw that many of these users were taken advantage of because they didn't know how to use these services properly. And most of them are wananchi. These are people that make, say, 50K a week, and if a fraudster steals 30K, their livelihood has been disrupted. So I think it's important for such individuals to know that there is recourse when they need help. The laws and regulations say, for example, you can go to the central bank, which regulates mobile money. You can approach UCC, which has a consumer protection department. But these are big entities, and we need approachable entities, middlemen that are able to connect consumers to the resolution of their issues. So thank you, Joe.
Yeah, no, I think, Mr. Sima, you've really given us, a very good overview of the risks and also how to mitigate those risks. And I think you raised a critical point about awareness, raising awareness about the risks that are associated with data protection, but also privacy. And I think sometimes people don't use the settings on these digital platforms well, because you can actually limit who can access your photos if they are not within, they're not on a connection list or something of that sort. But also, I think you raised a critical point about the existence of regulation. That I think in Uganda we've taken a considerable step, to have the Privacy Act and the privacy regulations and what the Personal Data Protection Office is doing. I think all those are really critical and important. Yeah, so even as we go ahead, I saw a comment from Mr. Biaruhanga Francis, and he was saying that in his opinion, we should have a double consent requirement, where when they collect the personal data, there is consent, but also before you share to a third party. And I think that's a meaningful suggestion. And I think also that that makes it really, it would serve to protect more. But how effective it is also another debate. And if and if business, in a business sense, is it efficient to require double consent, especially for businesses that are in this specific area? So I think we'll move on to Kenneth, who again has done a lot of considerable work and also consulting and sits on several boards, especially on financial technology. How do e-consent solutions help individuals maintain control over their personal data? And what challenges do we face in making these solutions both user-friendly and secure. I think it's important to hear, at least from Kenneth, who's really familiar with this space of financial technology.
Thank you, Joel. That's a very loaded question, but I mean, I'm happy to share some of our experiences, and I'll pick up from what Daudi has been mentioning and all the points that he has made. So absolutely, we need sensitization of the masses. People need to know what consent means and how much of their data is collected, because currently we as human beings, we are driven by interests. By the time my data is collecting, or by the time I understand, it's not that I don't care about consent. I do. It's not that I don't care about my data being collected, but I am most caring about the service I'm trying to access. If I go and I want to get a loan, at that point, I'm more interested in the money that is going to be given to me. So even when they give me all these documents to sign, most of us will not read those documents. So you'll end up just signing. They tell you where to sign because your motivating factor that you're thinking about is the money that you're trying to access. So we need to, and yet there's a lot of information, there's a lot of knowledge in knowing what is my data going to be used, what is my data going to be used for, how long is it going to be kept, in what jurisdiction is it going to be kept, what other third parties are going to actually access my data. Now, all that information is critical information, but very, very few people know about that. So that's where I think, much as the law is already in place, I agree with Daudi that there has to be a lot of sensitization that goes on in different mediums. Informing people that this is how your data is collected. It's important for you to consent. Your data, you have the right to request for your data to be forgotten, etc. And why that sensitization is also actually important is because for every law, there is also avenues for abuse of the law. How do you also protect the organizations from reputational brand damage? Someone goes on Twitter and says organization A collected my data and misused it. And before you come out with a press statement to protect your brand, the damage is already done. So the sensitization has to be on both sides to inform the data subjects, but also in a way to protect the organizations that are collecting that data. And that then, segues into the question you're asking me: how are we doing it using technology? And that's something that, to be honest, is quite complicated. But we've managed to come up with systems, most especially in the financial sector, as you already mentioned. You'll find that the regulators, again, like Daudi mentioned, Central Bank of Uganda, that is regulating fintechs, requires us to capture KYC of our customers. By law, we are required to capture that KYC. So you'll find that we've captured the information, but for other services, we still have to now get consent from that same customer. Now, we have to sort of like create segments of our customers. How many of those are using smartphones? How many of those are using the non-smartphones, the features? Because there's certain consent requirements that you're going to be able to provide, for example, on a smartphone, but you're not able to provide on a feature phone in that regard. So technology infrastructure is one of the challenges that we are facing, in the sense that the smartphone penetration is still low, much as it's the desired device to use when you're giving consent, because it has a camera. You can confirm that it is me, Kenneth, who is actually giving consent. You can confirm liveliness, certain things that we can do on the phone to confirm that it's a live person in front of the camera. You've seen systems that ask you to turn left, turn right, turn upside down. Those are certain features to confirm liveliness. Now, those are things you can do on a smartphone to really confirm that the individual who is in front of the camera is the one that is supposed to be giving consent. But then you'll find that now that feature, you cannot provide it on the non-smartphones. So you find that even when we are designing these technologies, we want to be inclusive. We want to make sure that everybody else in the country, that every citizen is able to give consent using technology. But then you find that there will be challenges of the infrastructure. So we end up having to design both. You design for both the smartphone users and the non-smartphone users, but then there'll be limits. The feature phone user will be limited in terms of options that they can have to give consent. So, but we've managed to put some solutions in the market. We've actually gotten a very good uptake of the services. At least most of our customers of IoTech are able to give consent for their data to be used for processing, and we've seen this consent really come through. But of course, the other experiences we've also seen is language. You'll find that you've designed your consent system in English, but then the person you're targeting to consent he may not be able to understand English. So you find that you have to, either provide a checkbox or provide a way for someone to confirm that they understand the language in which the consent is required, etc. So to summarize, really infrastructure that is available, that is available right now. We have to work with what we have, and we provide solutions depending on the category of the device that the customer is going to be giving. Back to you, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kenneth. I think you've really given us an expert's perspective of some of the structural challenges that might exist when you are trying to design a platform and ensure privacy, or depending on the platforms that people are using. But also what really I found very interesting was how, the motivation factor, you are signing up and you want to just use the platform, or you want to do something and you've been told sign here or click on this box to access the service. Some people have argued that data is a very, very important issue. And the same way when someone is selling land or signing, financial documents to get like a loan from the bank, it requires that they sign, they get independent legal advice before they sign on. And so you have to actually take a form to a lawyer, and then the lawyer has to sign. And some people have argued that that should be the sensitivity with which we approach data. Although others have then said that would slow down decision making, it would kill efficiency. And so I think some of the points you've made are very, very important, because we have to think about them, especially as we think about how do we allow people to maintain control over their personal data, and even in the sense that it could be limited by the kinds of gadgets that they are using. So thank you for sharing that very expert perspective, if I may say. And if you have any questions, I'd like to encourage you to use the Q&A button to ask your questions. Our panelists are here, and at least for the next 20 minutes, we still have them here. We should be able to ask them a few questions that they can answer. Kenneth, did you want to jump in? I see you put your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Joel. Maybe just something that is important that I just recalled from that discussion. The other experience we've also seen is that really technology has made it easier for you to be able to access these services. Again, we've seen scenarios where someone as far as the deepest part of the country is actually able to give consent using a device. So those are some of the advantages we've seen from, bringing consent to the digital rails, bringing it to and making it digital. Because currently, right now, without the digital infrastructure, it means that for anyone to give consent, they have to be physically present, or they have to sign a physical document. And yet we know that the market is going digital. So these are some of the wins that we have seen with trying to digitize it, in the sense that also it allows the consumer to really be in control. You receive an SMS and it's clear, it's telling you the organization that is requesting for your consent and how they want, which data they actually want you to access. And then you have the power back to you. So it allows you to either say yes, or it allows you to say no. And there's no sort of like hidden information. There's no cryptic language. So yeah, those are some of the advantages that we've seen by bringing consent to the digital world.
Okay, thank you. No, I think that's really meaningful, especially how people now don't have to sign papers, that they can consent to all of this electronically. Thank you for that addition, Kenneth. So we'll move to Mr. Chimera. who again has played and sits on several boards and is really a key player within the consumer space and also as the team leader at Consent Uganda. Mr. Chimera, this one is for you. What advice would you give to consumers to help them make informed choices about the use of their personal data by companies? And I think this is the key one, the government. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joel. And I would like to thank the colleagues who put up the team, because what Daudi and Kenneth have just shared is quite superb. And you make my day and you make the day for the consumers. But Joel and colleagues who are listening in, I would like to start by just sharing a few highlights which are very key. The World Economic Forum is going on, but it has just raised 10 risks that I would like to read, and they are very key to us. They just released them yesterday. The top risks in 2 years and 10 years. There are 10, but the first one is misinformation and disinformation. Now, number 4, it is cyber insecurity. Number 6 is lack of economic opportunities. And number 9 is economic downturn. And when you look at these top 10 risks and the ones that I've just mentioned, there are many others with conflict and so forth. If you look at data, if you look at digital usage, the information that is taken from us as consumers, it can be used to misinform.
I'm not so sure. Can we hear Mr. Chimera?
No, I think he has
I also, yeah, I lost him.
Okay. We apologize for the technical glitch. We'll get in touch with Mr. Chimera. But as we get to him, there've been some interesting questions that have come in, and I'd like to direct this one to Mr. Asimwe.
About that,
okay,
Joel?
he's back. Yes, you're now back. Please go ahead.
I will say very quickly that for consumers, whether you are employed or unemployed, you are in education, looking at the 10 risks and 3 of key aspects I've mentioned: misinforming and disinforming, cyber insecurity, and lack of economic opportunities. If anybody misuses your data to misinform and disinform, you lack economic opportunities. It will bring about cyber insecurity. So what we are discussing today in relations to the top world risks in 2 years to 10 years, this is something very key and we need to relate it. Joel, having asked, and how best could we protect the consumers and advise them? The excitement that we are going through as consumers in the advent of technology doesn't allow us at times, and it is good that Kenneth mentioned it. If you want money, you would not even read the font, small fonts, you'll be rushing in where the dotted lines to sign on. But as we rush in to sign on, as consumers, we need to be critically aware. It is our consumer responsibility to be critically aware, irrespective of it to be our right to access, to choose, to utilize. But we have a consumer responsibility to be critically aware how the actions and the events in which we access certain aspects, including technology as digital. We will appreciate that the acceleration of technology has taken us as consumers to the new level. It has taken us to the comfort zones. It has made life very easy for us. But for the success and the mutual benefit of the digital ecosystem, there is a need to have consumers protected. Both Daudi and Kenneth have mentioned all this. We will never, benefit from the benefits of the digital environment, if consumers, and if there isn't a collective approach to address consumer rights, needs, security, and privacy. And I would like to say that consumers, whether knowledgeable or not knowledgeable, anywhere, any day, anyone is a victim if we are not curious, if we are not critical, if we do not question what is the beauty behind something so rosy. So this is what I usually tell consumers. How does one tell you you've won a marathon even when you have never run 10 meters? And then you rush in to grapple this rosy, and one harvests your data, one takes everything that you have. So consumers, we need to be critically aware, and we need to assert and even look out. Some of the other aspects that we need to do, and like you said, Joel, that you're very curious in what companies and governments should do. One things I need to commend Uganda, that we have got the legal, we have got the policy, legal, regulatory, and institutional frameworks. Our host today is evident to that. The key aspect to make sure that the economy benefits, businesses benefit, and consumers are benefiting, to make all the economy and businesses resilient, they need to be protected. We need, because the consumers are the majority, they are the ones who access these services, and charges are taken off their access to the service, which monies are used to sustain businesses. So what is very key is to protect the consumers by implementing these legal and regulatory frameworks that have been put in place. And my colleagues mentioned that it is through partnerships. Consumer awareness is going to be number one. If we are to refine and make sure that the country benefits, we do not have the risk of misinformation. We do not have the risk of cybersecurity. We do not have the risk of losing out on opportunities. We will have to empower the consumers to make informed choice. And I like the proposals of double consent and consenting. So in essence, my advice would be using the legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, and institutional to have strengthened rollout of consumer protection. The aspects of advancing awareness, even to the rural people, looking at for partnerships to join and push it further, facilitating consumer complaints. We have just concluded doing, we carry out on a daily basis, harvest consumer concerns, harvest business and farmer concerns. In the month of October to December, we harvested over 1,600 complaints. But a big percentage of those complaints was with regards to digital and financial services challenges consumers are experiencing. They are either being duped, whether the network is low, the information is taken off them and it is used in otherwise. So this is where, as a country, we will need to protect the consumer, the majority, the 45 million plus who are using the digital infrastructure, whose data is being collected on a daily basis, needs to be protected. Enforcement of all these legal frameworks and raising the bar in implementation and enforcement of the legal and regulatory frameworks. Thank you very much. Joel, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. Absolutely, very detailed, and again, from a seasoned expert in the consumer space. And I think key takeaways for me is awareness is key. Consent is an irrelevant conversation if the person making consent is unaware of the risks that are associated. And I think we've had discussions in the chat room about double consent, But also, I like the point that Mr. Chimera made on having a comprehensive regulatory framework which allows for accountability. And I think that's where the organizers of this event, the Personal Data Protection Office, have come in. Again, we have just about 7 minutes left. Thank you to our audience that have tuned in. We, of course, cannot address all questions, however desirable that may be. And so we'll just address about 2 questions, and then we'll hand over to the Personal Data Protection Office in about 6 minutes. But this question, I think, Mr. Asimwe, this question comes from Julius, and he's asking, and I think, Mr. Asimwe, you hinted on it already, but if you could comment in a minute or 30 seconds, how can we hold service providers of digital platforms responsible for clients' exposure to hackers and data fraudsters? Even when you don't share your PIN, fraudsters access your privacy. I think it's a question of enforcement. But Mr. Asimwe, can you comment on how can we hold these providers of digital platforms accountable when clients' data is accessed by hackers and fraudsters?
All right, thank you, Joel. That's a very delicate question. So before we had the Data Protection and Privacy Act or the National Payment Systems Act in 2019, we didn't have, users or collectors of data did not have a lot of regulation oversight. But when these acts came in, there was some sort of mechanism to hold them accountable. So we have, for example, the Data Protection Act stipulates on usage of data. For example, Section 12 of the Data Protection Act talks about using data for a specific reason. And then Section 18 talks about retention. How long are you supposed to keep the personal data that you've collected? So we know that victims of hacking are mostly in the financial ecosystem. So sadly, some of these are inside jobs. And that's something that we cannot find a quick solution for, because it's hard to pinpoint who stole the data and where. We know that some of these financial institutions have some bad actors as employees who have used people's data to steal information. But that's one of example. But we have laws now that can hold these entities accountable. And we have the court systems where you can take your complaints to. But even before the court systems, these laws have mechanisms of reporting. The Data Protection Act stipulates how you can report. The National Payment Systems Act, in particular, for this example, gives reporting mechanisms and how you can escalate your complaint. So we have, for that particular question, we have the National Payment Systems Act that has come to keep these people in check, the users and collectors of data. The Personal Data Protection Office in particular has to give you license to collect data. So if you're dealing with an entity, please make sure that it is licensed by the PDPO to collect data. And the PDPO goes ahead to train an individual from every entity that is licensed on how to manage this data. So when your data is hacked or misused or harvested, then you can hold them accountable. But we now have some laws in place from 2019 onwards that can hold them accountable. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Asimwe, for those remarks. Again, while I would like for this conversation to go on and on and on, because our panelists are really, in law, we like to say, doing justice as a metaphorical illustration for them being very thorough and adept in their answers to these questions. Sadly, I cannot hold you here for more than an hour. I know there are going to be a series of events that are part of the Privacy Month, other webinars, and I think you'll be invited, or you're obviously invited. Please sign up. Some of these questions have been noted, but otherwise, some of the key takeaways from our event have been key to this is creating awareness on data protection laws, because, but also being consumer-centric in designing products and thinking about the consumer and how they are affected. But also, I think one of the critical points that came in is enforcement. Where can you go if you feel there's a red flag or something is an issue. I would like to thank our panelists, because I'm going to hand over to the Personal Data Protection Office, who have done a tremendous job, discussing these questions, sharing from their personal but also professional experience. Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Dawoodi, and thank you, Henry, for doing this this conversation and topic justice. I'd like to hand over to the Personal Data Protection Office to close this session. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Joel. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you so much for the good moderation you've done today, and to the panelists, thank you. Panelists, thank you for sharing your expertise, your insights, and of course, it has been a very engaging discussion, as you could see in the chat and the panel, the Q&A panel. We really appreciate your willingness to share knowledge and experiences with our community, and we deeply appreciate the time and effort that you've invested in preparing and actively participating in this discussion. Of course, your passion for the subject matter was evident, and it greatly contributed to the overall success of this webinar. I would like to also thank the participants for always making the time whenever you're called upon. Our data privacy campaign continues. We still have a lot in store for you. As Joel has mentioned, we have a lot of activities. We have other webinars coming up. We have awareness engagements. We have talk shows on radio and TV. As you'll be seeing, we shall be marketing most of these on our social media platforms. So we encourage all of you to follow us on social media and keep these conversations flowing. Thank you so much. We will be able to share the link for the recording. For those of you who want it, you could just send us an email on info@pdpo.go.ug. I am going to share a link in the chat for you to give us feedback on this webinar. Tell us where you feel we should improve. Otherwise, thank you very much. It has been a very, very good webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was an honor and a pleasure joining you colleagues on the panel and all the audience listening in to us. I wish you a happy data protection month and privacy. Cheers. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, Joel.
Happy Privacy Month.
Happy Privacy Month to you too.